Order. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. The committee is meeting today from, looking at the clock now, at 4:10 to 6:10 to begin its study on the NUCTEC security equipment contract. Officials from Public Services and Procurement Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and the Communications Security Establishment and the Canadian Border Service Agency are here to discuss this subject. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020, the committee may continue to sit in a hybrid format. This means that members can participate either in person in the committee room or by video conference via Zoom. To ensure that an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen to either use the floor, to use English, or French. And I would ask that should you be speaking in French, to make certain that your language is in French for the interpreters. Likewise in English. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. To raise a point of order during the meeting, committee members should ensure their microphone is unmuted and say point of order and to get the chairman's attention. In order to ensure social distancing in the committee room, if you need to speak privately with the clerk or an analyst during the meeting, please email them through the committee email address. I will now invite the representatives of PSPC to make their opening statements.
Alors, bonjour, Monsieur le Président, honorable membre du Comité permanent. Bonjour.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting me today. My name is Lorenzo Irachi, and I am the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of the Procurement Branch at Public Services and Procurement Canada. Joining me today are two of my colleagues from our Departmental Oversight Branch, Catherine Poulin, Director General of Integrity and Forensic Accounting Services, and Claude Kateb, Director General of the Industrial Security Sector.
I would like to focus my brief remarks on two areas. First, I'll provide some general background with respect to roles, responsibilities, and process in contracting security. And second, I will provide an overview of the specific procurement process involving NUCTEC that is the focus of today's meeting. With regards to security and contracting, each federal department is responsible for protecting sensitive information and assets under its control, not only in its own operations, but also through any contracts it manages. Federal departments are also responsible for determining if suppliers will require access to sensitive information, assets, or sites. In its capacity as a common service provider, Public Services and Procurement Canada has two distinct responsibilities with respect to security in contracting. En premier lieu,
first, PSPC's Contract Security Program is responsible for security screening companies and personnel. The program also provides the necessary security clauses to be included in each contract based on the information provided by the client department. Second, PSPC's procurement branch ensures that the procurement is undertaken in a way that reflects the security profile and that suppliers have received the necessary clearance prior to contract award. It should be noted that the level of security required is determined by the client department in consultation with their departmental chief security officer. These security requirements are captured at a high level through a security requirements checklist, which is sent to PSPC along with other documents.
When procurement officers at Public Services and Procurement Canada receive these documents, and where security requirements have been identified, they contact the Contract Security Program. The program, in turn, provides the procurement officer with security clauses to be used in the solicitation and contract. Prior to awarding a contract with security requirements, our procurement officers must confirm with our Contract Security Program that the supplier holds the appropriate security clearance. Mr. Chair, I will now move on to the procurement at issue, which involves NUCTEC. En décembre 2019,
In December 2019, Public Services and Procurement Canada issued a competitive request for standing offer with the requirement to establish 2 standing offers for the supply of 2 types of security screening equipment: conveyor-style X-ray machines and walk-through metal detectors. This standing offer would be for Global Affairs Canada and other federal departments on an as and when requested basis. The various trade agreements to which Canada is a signatory applied, and international suppliers were eligible to bid on this process. A standing offer is not a contract. It is an offer from a supplier to provide goods or services at pre-arranged prices under set terms and conditions, when and if required. It is not a contract until the government issues a call-up against the standing offer, which is a notice to a supplier to provide the goods or services in accordance with their standing offer. It is important to note that the government is under no obligation to purchase until such time as a call-up has been issued.
Standing offer for screening equipment closed in early April. 7 offers were received for the supplier of conveyor-style X-ray machines, and all were evaluated against the requirements of the request for standing offer. This included the need for offerers to demonstrate that they met a set of 63 mandatory technical requirements to be declared responsive. In accordance with the request for standing offer, the responsive offer with the lowest evaluated price would be selected. 3 of the 7 offers received were determined to be responsive, meaning that 3 of the 7 offers met the 63 mandatory technical requirements. Of these 3, NUCTEC had the lowest evaluated price and was therefore awarded the standing offer. I would like to conclude, Mr. Chair, by noting that to date, no call-ups have been issued against the standing offer. Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide this overview, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And now we'll go with Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dan Danaher. I am the Assistant Deputy Minister of the International Platform at Global Affairs Canada. My team and I are responsible for providing the infrastructure required by Canada's network of missions abroad. That includes all real property, common services, and physical installations. We are grateful for the opportunity today to provide some background on Global Affairs Canada's recent procurement of X-ray equipment for those missions. Firstly, we at Global Affairs are seized by the importance of keeping our employees, our information, and our assets safe. We have a robust security framework that continuously monitors the threat and risk environments, and we adapt our approach at those threats and risks as those threats and risks change. We work with our closest partners globally, exchange ideas and approaches. We learn from each other. Our installations are often complex, including high security zones, as well as operations and public access or reception and public zones. X-ray equipment is used in the latter and helps screening deliveries and visitors to the mission. While this equipment represents a small part of our installations, every component is important for the good functioning and safety of our missions abroad. In mid-July, PSPC awarded a standing offer worth up to $6.8 million over 5 years for NUCTEC X-ray equipment. To date, Global Affairs has not availed itself of this arrangement and has no NUCTEC equipment in its missions abroad. In the days following the award of the standing offer, the Minister of Foreign Affairs directed me to conduct a review of how we acquire security equipment such as X-ray machines. I turned to Deloitte Canada, and they conducted an exhaustive review. Their findings are currently in draft form, but I am sufficiently satisfied with their recommendations that we have already begun to implement them. Firstly, Deloitte found that Global Affairs Canada followed all applicable policies. While that is reassuring, they also found that those policies asked 2 key questions that fundamentally influenced our approach. Would the equipment A, handle sensitive information, or B, be connected to our information networks? Because this equipment is used in a public access zone, and the answer to those questions was negative, the procurement proceeded through normal processing, without the application of a national security exemption or higher levels of security, which my PSPC colleagues can explain should the chair or committee members be interested. I should point out here that Global Affairs Canada has in place a national security exemption for the acquisition of equipment we use inside the more secure zones of our chanceries. Deloitte, however, recommended that we consider that the technical specifications themselves, even for detection equipment in the public zone, should only be accessible to companies with higher levels of security clearance. Further, they recommended that we consider that service personnel who had access to the equipment should be security cleared. These two steps would go a long way to future-proofing our public zones from future threats, should they emerge. We are currently working through the mechanics of implementing these recommendations. However, I can confirm today that Global Affairs Canada will not avail itself of the standing offer awarded in July 2020, and we have already begun the process with PSPC to design a new procurement strategy that will implement Deloitte's recommendations. We thank the committee for giving us this opportunity to explain how we are continuously improving and adapting as we strive to keep our people, information, and assets safe. I'm pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Danaher. Much appreciated. I understand we're having a little bit of difficulty with your sound, but we'll try and make certain that if we need to interrupt briefly to correct that, we'll keep on top of that as we go through. Thank you. So we'll now start our questions in the first round, and we'll start with Mr. Paul Hughes. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today to answer our questions. If I've heard what you said regarding the first assessment that was conducted and then by Deloitte, but my problem is still that the Government of Canada accepted to go forward with a request for a standing offer with NUCTEC. So, Ms. Mullen, what is your current assessment of NUCTEC?
Hello, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Let me begin, first of all, by giving you a feel for my role within the organization so that you understand where I'm coming from with my remarks today. As the Director General of Partnerships and Risk Mitigation at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity within the Communication Security Establishment, I'm responsible for 3 main functions. First is building trust-based partnerships with all levels of government, Canadian critical infrastructure, and the private industry. Second is providing cybersecurity architecture advice and guidance to our partners and the Canadian public at large based on the threat landscape that we observe. And thirdly, implementing risk mitigation programs aimed at reducing the risks identified through our assessments of technologies on the basis of our understanding of the threat environment, which is informed by both classified
Excusez-moi, Madame Mullen.
Sorry, Ms. Mullen. I don't want to be impolite, but I only have 6 minutes to ask my questions. Do you have a direct answer regarding my question about the security risk assessment for NUCTEC? Could you confirm that NUCTEC is really related to the Chinese Communist Party and under its direct control, yes or no?
So CSE was not asked to assess NUCTEC as a part of the Global Affairs Canada standing offer that we're here to speak about today.
Merci. Merci, Madame.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question will be for public services. So if we haven't even asked for an assessment, how can we justify that the Government of Canada provides a contract with NUCTEC? Is that because we're just pretending it's not happening? We didn't want to know? Because if we hadn't said anything, a contract may have been awarded. I understand that there wasn't one, but there could have been one in July. Could you explain why?
Alors, Monsieur le Président, pour la question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this question regarding the procurement for NUCTEC. The needs and level of security associated with the needs were established by Global Affairs. They provided us with the information. At that time, no potential security risk was flagged. Therefore, we went ahead with the procurement. in a way that was open to all companies.
Vous saviez
But you knew that in terms of the U.S. Transportation Agency, since 2014, it has been calling for caution for using this Nuktak equipment at airports. We must have known about that in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this question. Were we aware of the information provided emanating from the U.S.? Yes, we were aware. That being said, the process, as I mentioned, did not flag any security impacts. And in terms of procurement process, we do not know who will be awarded or will award the contract eventually. Right now, this is a standing offer. So the process went forward in an open manner since nothing was flagged. Honestly, could you explain to the committee why, given everything we know regarding China right now, we just voted on a motion in the House of Commons asking for answers from Huawei? How can we do business with a company that is directly related to the Chinese Communist Party without going ahead with an in-depth security assessment?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this question. Once again, in terms of process on our end, the procurement processes are based on the security threats and risks identified by our client, which in this case was Global Affairs. Our procurement approach currently does not exclude companies or businesses from specific countries. At the time of the procurement process, there were no identified security risks, and that's why the process went ahead as it did. Now, for Global Affairs, could you answer the question, why did you not think that security systems should be put in place?
We did do a security review, Mr. Chair, prior to the award of this or the issue of the request for standing offer. But again, that security review really was based on two fundamental questions that we asked in accordance with the Government of Canada's security policy. When those two questions were considered negative, this was considered low risk, and it was the paradigm that existed at the time, and that has now changed.
Thank you for that response. Mr. Weiler, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd also like to thank all of our witnesses for coming to join and speak with our committee today. I'd like to jump right into it here. I was hoping that witnesses could explain a little bit more about what our government does to protect against unethical and illegal business practices.
So, Mr. President, thank you for the question. I'm not sure if that was directed to Public Services and Procurement Canada, but I will start. From a procurement perspective, we do have the integrity regime, which is part of the work that we do, as well as I mentioned during my opening remarks, the contract security program. So briefly, the contract security program does a few things. First, once we receive a requisition from a client department that indicates security obligations, the contract security program is engaged to ensure that the appropriate security clauses are included in the tender documents as well as the resulting contracts. And in advance of a contract being awarded, the procurement officers will check in with the contract security program to ensure that the company has the appropriate security clearances to meet or to match the security requirements of the procurement. In addition to that, we the department manages the integrity regime, and I've got colleagues from the department who are available to provide more details if necessary. In essence, what that does is it ensures that companies have not been tried or convicted of offenses, and if they have been, they are placed on an inadmissibility list or ineligibility list, where we ensure that we don't undertake procurements with them. So briefly, that's from a Public Service Procurement Canada perspective.
Thank you for that. And with this in mind, what implications did the integrity regime and the other measures that you mentioned have on the new tech standing offer?
So with regards to both of these in terms of contract security and integrity, I'll deal with the first one. First, in terms of contract security, as I indicated, once we received the requirement from Global Affairs Canada, there was no security requirement associated with it. Therefore, the procurement went ahead in the manner that it did. In advance of awarding the contract, in advance of awarding the standing offer, pardon me, the procurement team did a check-in with the integrity regime to ensure that NUCTEC was not identified, and at that time, and NUCTEC was not part of the inadmissibility list.
Thank you. And with this in mind, have you considered any, and more, I heard in the opening remarks about the recommendations that were made by Deloitte, and I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to how, as a government, we're considering new steps to protect the security of our workplaces abroad.
That's probably, Mr. Chair, that question is best fielded by me. We do have a very robust threat and risk assessment process. It's called the Global Security Framework. It's been in place for a number of years now. And we have a very, very large security team that focuses on it, and we deliver those installations abroad. So it's pretty robust. This equipment hasn't previously been considered to be sensitive.
Mr. Danger, can you just hold on for a second? We just need to check some technicalities. You're not coming through clearly yet. So just hold on for a second, if you would. And I'll pause the time for you, Mr. Weiler. Sorry?
You.
Mr. Chair, it might also be good a good time to
Okay.
Do you want me to try to hold this closer to my mouth?
If you could try, Mr. Danaher, we'll try and see if it works or not. The issue is the sound quality is not sufficient that our interpreters can interpret. So what I'm going to suggest is that you try again. We're going to ask you to try and speak as slowly as possible, and we'll see if our interpreters can hear, and then we'll see if this works. Do try and hold the mic closer to your mouth, but not directly right at it, and then we'll see if that works. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will try to speak a little clearer and louder, okay? So just as, thank you again for the question, just to confirm, we do have a very robust global security framework that is constantly assessing the threats and the risks abroad, and we are always assessing our vulnerabilities. This equipment was not seen as overly sensitive equipment, so it did not apply, or the national security exemption that we had did not apply. It fell within a paradigm that basically allowed it to be competed out in the open in that way. Does that answer the member's question?
That does indeed. And I'm just hoping you can maybe expand on that a little bit more on what level of risk was thought that this equipment could provide.
Essentially, because the equipment stands alone in a room and is screening visitors' equipment, there's a briefcase or a bag or something like that.
Mr. Danaher, excuse me for interrupting again. Could you, it seemed to come through a little clearer when you spoke a little bit slower. That way the interpreters could pick you up. Could you try that and see? I realize I'm breaking up your usual cadence, but if you would try that, I would appreciate it.
Okay, I will do my best to slow down. So this equipment is in the public zone, public access zone outside of our chanceries, or just in the very exterior of our chanceries, and is used to screen visitors' belongings. It is not typically plugged into our network, and it doesn't handle classified information. And as a consequence, it doesn't fall within two of the key questions of the government policy on information security, and was just put out to broad tender, as you heard earlier.
Great. Thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, how long do I have left?
Ms. Weiler, you've got another 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, maybe just quickly, if maybe the witness from PSPC, Mr. Irachi, could mention how does a standing offer differ from, or how is it different from a contract per se?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So a standing offer is essentially a pre-qualified tool where a supplier has been, or multiple suppliers have been selected to provide goods or services at predetermined prices under established or set terms and conditions. A standing offer is actually not a contract. There is no obligation on the part of the Government of Canada to procure anything using a standing offer. In fact, a contract is only entered into when the Government of Canada issues what is referred to as a call-up to the supplier. And what a call-up is basically an order for a certain amount of goods or services in accordance with the terms of the standing offer. So until such a time as a call-up is offered, there's no obligation on the part of the Government of Canada with regards to that procurement instrument.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Weiler. Ms. Vignola, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I listened to you closely. I understand when the call for offer did not include any security measures because this was only for visitors. But now, since it's difficult to know everything that's going on within a business, but I saw that there were 5 contracts between Border Services and NUCTEC, even though NUCTEC was condemned in 2010 for actions of corruptions that they had used honey traps to get some investors, and in 2017 they were asked to cooperate with the Chinese government, and since then there have been 5 contracts.
I'd like to understand how a company with that history can be seriously considered for a standing offer. I just don't understand how that works, and I'd really like to understand.
Alors, bonjour, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if it was directed towards public works and procurement, but I will provide a response. As mentioned earlier, the procurement process that was used to arrive at the standing offer, because there were no security requirements, it went forward, and NUCTEC was one of the companies that responded and that was found to be compliant with all the requirements. In terms of procurement, we did check with the program, and as the company was not identified or flagged at that level, it was eligible to provide a standing offer. So if I understand you correctly, Mr. Irachi, despite this history of going forward with dumping, of honey traps, bribing, bribery. There was nothing flagged within the government that perhaps this company would not be up to snuff. And if it was one of the lowest bidders with such a history of dumping, shouldn't there have been a little red light going off? I'm not blaming the officials. I want to be really clear on that. I just want the process to be improved. I want our security to be and our safety to be ensured. Despite that whole history, there were no little red lights that went off. Nobody anywhere said, oh, that company can no longer be on our list because we can't be sure we can trust them.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for this question, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do all want to improve the systems and approaches to make sure that Canadians' safety and security is respected. Excuse me. Some issues were raised with NUCTEC. That was part. Well, we had some information on the company, but in terms of procurement, we had limited options. With the standing offer, the company had met all the requirements. It's one of the sectors we're looking at with our colleagues at other departments to see whether there's a way to decrease potential risks. That being said, as I mentioned, at the beginning of a procurement process, we do not know who will be eligible and who will receive the standing offer. So there are approaches we use to diminish risks. For example, having a well-identified security level at the beginning of the process.
Okay.
All right. So identifying the security level, and NUCTEC met the requirements. And
30 seconds.
C'est bon.
Okay. 30 seconds. In the case of NUCTEC, sometimes, well, maybe not in NUCTEC's case, but there was some dumping done, and the Chinese government may have provided some funds to allow that dumping to happen. Have you checked to see whether this company has required funds from a foreign government to allow it to get through the cracks? Thank you for the question. On the issue of funding from governments, that's something we're looking at. Many countries are looking at that, and it is a point of friction between countries, not just between China and other countries, but even between Canada and the US, European countries. The definition of funding, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, that is all part of what we are looking at. It's a fairly complex issue because there are so many different approaches and ways that countries can try to help fund various companies, that it is something we're looking at, but that's a problem that almost all countries across the world are facing. That is to see who is funding how.
You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think what's most interesting to note is that we seem to be back at square one when it comes to procurement now that Global Affairs has decided not to avail itself to the standing order. So it leads me to ask the question that somebody at either Global Affairs or PSPC clearly didn't do their homework ahead of time, and they would have gone ahead with purchasing the NUCTEC if the media hadn't broken the story. So whose responsibility was it to do the homework on this?
So, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good question. I mean, this The assessment started with Global Affairs. Global Affairs assessed this procurement in a way, as I said before, that complied with policy, and the procurement started without us requesting a national security exemption. Now, whether or not a national security exemption would have led us to a different outcome is another question. I can't speculate if it would have. But that it does start with the assessment at the beginning of whether or not this conformed with policy, and for whatever reason, it was the paradigm at the time. Those two questions, once they were answered, were deemed sufficient to go ahead with the procurement that resulted in NUCTEC getting the standing offer.
So maybe you can help.
We stopped.
Maybe you can help me through this. It might be more appropriate for PSPC, because I know with PSPC, pursuant to the ineligibility and suspension policy, they may sometimes deem a company ineligible or suspended from entering into certain contracts if it's engaged in specified offenses within specified timeframes. So the policy may also apply to a company, or in some cases its subsidiary, that was convicted of similar offenses in the past 3 years in a jurisdiction other than Canada. Once you brought on Deloitte, you did your review, or maybe this is for PSPC, I don't know. Has NUTEC or its subsidiaries been convicted of offenses specified in the ineligibility and suspension policy, or of similar offenses in a jurisdiction other than Canada within the past 3 years?
I think, Mr. Chair, that's a question for PSPC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the answer to that question is no, but I will turn to my colleague, Catherine Poulain, just to get confirmation.
Thank you for the question. And you were right, the answer is no. So we are aware of the allegation, but none of those allegations, we haven't found any charges nor conviction listed in the policy associated with those behavior.
So how would you go about to investigate whether bidders have been convicted of offenses specified by this policy?
So we're doing some verification, and we haven't found, throughout those verification, we haven't found any charges nor conviction under one of the offenses listed in the policy. Consequently, NUTEC has been founded not to be ineligible to be awarded that contract.
Okay. We talked a little bit about subsidies, and through you, Mr. Chair, there's been an ongoing debate about China's role in the world, and a lot of red baiting, a lot of really, I think, problematic framings around China, particularly some of my conservative colleagues who have a newfound disdain for the way that they run their economy. So through you, Mr. Chair, can anybody care to comment on Canada's obligations as it relates to FIPA in allowing for broad bidding from countries like China? Because I'm hearing in some of the rhetoric that they should automatically be excluded from bidding on contracts, yet it was our conservative friends who entered us into, I think, a 30-year plus contract.
Mr. Chair, I don't know to whom the question would be best.
Probably PSPC, just because we're in a global trade agreement, and I'm hearing a lot of really derogatory comments as it relates to China and its state-run, essentially it's state-run capitalism, and yet it doesn't seem to be the same frame that was used not too long ago when the Conservative government entered into a long and ironclad agreement with China. What would it cost us if we were to try to end any kind of bidding processes from the People's Republic of China under FIPA?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll admit that I'm not very familiar with FIPA. What I will say is this. We have obligation in terms of trade agreements with numerous countries around the world, including to the World Trade Organization. And Canada's our approach in terms of procurement has been that Again, unless there are specific needs or requirements, particularly in the area of security, that our default is to open procurements, federal procurements to the international community. So I can't quantify what the cost would be. What I can tell you is this. Companies who are not happy with the way procurement is done have the option of either returning to the Canadian International Trade Tribunal or to the federal courts in instances where we undertake procurements that are not aligned either with our legal obligations or with our trade obligations.
And again, taking the subject matter of NUCTEC and setting the personal opinions on it aside, when you talk about subsidies, how would state subsidies in a company like NUCTEC differ from the subsidies that we provide to, say, oil and gas?
If we can get a very quick answer on that, appreciate it. Thank you.
It's Lorenzo, sorry, it's Public Services Procurement Canada. I'm not sure that we could answer that question. I think the issue of subsidies is a fairly complex one. And as I was mentioning, I think a lot of different countries use a lot of different approaches or mechanisms to be able to support domestic industries, which are the subject of ongoing discussions at the World Trade Organization and other international fora.
Thank you for the contribution. I will note I'm still having some audible troubles with the feedback and the echoes.
Thank you, Mr. Green, and we're trying to keep an eye on that. Ms. Poulin, if you have to speak again, if you could move your mic up just a touch, it might be helpful if you have to ask. Thank you. We're now going into our second round, and we'll go with Mr. McCauley. And Mr. McCauley, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses. I have to ask, why was a national security exemption not used for this? We've seen the government use it for paper clips, photocopy paper, jackets. Why not for something as vital as this?
Yeah, as Mr. Chair, I think that gets to the heart of this question here. It wasn't because we applied the tests that we've always been applying when we bought equipment that doesn't plug into our network.
So you just didn't consider it a security issue. Okay, great. I'm going to move over to CSC. How would have NUCTEC received a security clearance? Anyone?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I actually think that would be more appropriately answered by the industrial security folks at PSPC, as CSE is not actually involved in that.
Okay, Mr. Ratchie, how would a company that's owned by the Communist Party, it's a state-owned company, how would they have received a security clearance?
If you'll permit me, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer on behalf of Mr. Irachi.
Yeah, and quickly, please, because we're short of time.
Yes, so very quickly, we did not clear that company. We clear the industrial security sector, and contract security program clears Canadian companies. And NUCTEC does not hold a security clearance with the Government of Canada.
I thought I heard Mr. Doniger say that they had passed a security clearance. Would something like this not require security clearance?
So
in such a bid?
I believe, as others have noted, our services in the contract security program are triggered when a security requirement is identified for procurement. And in this particular case,
I find this whole thing just stupefying that something like this just overlooked, and just, again, mind-boggling. The CSC just came out with their cyber threat assessment report. I think it was just today, and very highlighting a lot of issues with state-owned actors, naming China and Russia for the first time. How would, the information that would have been gained from this equipment, how could have been gathered from our embassies? And does CSC have a concern about this?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So normally a supply chain integrity assessment, which is what CSE would perform in support of a department in making a risk-based decision on a procurement for a piece of technology like this.
But yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't ask the right question. your threat assessment report just came out today, specifically naming China for the first time and state-sponsored actors attempting, with cyber threats. What kind of information could such state-sponsored actors gather from our embassies from this equipment? Do you share the lack of concern that seems to be coming from Global Affairs and PSPC?
So to be honest, sir, I think that the nature of the X-ray machines over time has evolved such that they are becoming more of interest.
I know, but this is not about the nature of the past. This is about the exact machines that the government of Canada decided we were going to okay for our embassies.
Understood, sir. And this is exactly why we're working together now to identify this and other types of equipment that perhaps should be flagged in future under procurement activities, because the nature of the technology has evolved such that it actually could gather information that could be of risk to Canada.
If the media hadn't highlighted this issue, would even the CSE have been concerned?
So we, again, only perform these assessments when we're approached by a department who's actually making the acquisition, because it is actually the risk-based decision of the department making the acquisition.
How do we stop this from happening again? Does it start with Global Affairs saying to you, hey, can we bring in state-owned Chinese equipment into our embassies?
So the way this changes in the future is for them to come to us and ask whether the types of equipment that they're looking at should be assessed for supply chain integrity, in which case we do look at ownership as one of the three prongs of things that are assessed.
Mr. Chair, how much time? I think you've answered my question.
Mr. Drouin, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for taking the time on this important issue. I just want to perhaps get back to Global Affairs and just determine, and I'd love to hear from CBSA, because I know they're also big purchasers of scanners as well, and I'm not sure if I have if Mr. Harris or Ms. Zafar are the right folks that could answer this, but does CBSA invoke the national security exemption clause when they, or have higher security requirements when they buy similar technology?
Thank you. I'll just check the sound. I was having technical issues, so I will try and speak slowly for the benefit of the interpreters. To date, in our X-ray procurement, our X-ray detection procurement, we have not invoked the national security exemption for that purpose. As has been noted by my colleagues at GAC and Public Service and Procurement Canada, we do a review of the security requirements under the contract security policy. As X-ray equipment does not handle sensitive or technical information in our context, it hasn't to date risen to the bar to trigger enhanced security in that space. And as a result, we do procure X-ray technology from a number of different companies, including from NUCTEC.
And just depending on where the installation of these, again, similar technology would be installed, would the person installing that technology, and I'm not sure if you deal with the company itself or if they deal with a subcontractor, would they require a security clearance to install this, let's say, at the border or anywhere else?
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. We have a number of mitigating interventions that we put in place around this technology. As I said, one of the first ones is obviously to keep it disconnected from our networks and from any Government of Canada networks, which retains its integrity in terms of being a tool that can support our border officers' work in terms of secondary examinations. But the second is, as you mentioned, the fact that anyone affiliated with any of our suppliers would be screened through security processes and would be escorted on site if they were present in our facilities.
And I'd love to get back to Global Affairs on this. Again, if we take NUTEC for example, if the company had been successful and were to install, in the embassies, does GAC require those who would install that particular technology in our embassies a security clearance, or and I know X-ray is not exactly top-notch technology. There are some out there, but we can find them in some places where civilians operate often. But just wondering for general purposes for this committee.
In the past, thank you for the question. In the past, the answer to that is no, we haven't required that. And partly because any service personnel would be accompanied by security personnel at Global Affairs Canada and watching everything that they do. And that is changing moving forward. Understanding we have 178 locations around the world. And servicing, it can get very expensive, but it's an expense that we will be incurring as we move forward.
Okay. And for PSPC, and I know normally there would be when security requirements are triggered, but is there a second process where PSPC would advise the client department that perhaps because we've seen other departments procure similar technology, that you may want to invoke the NSC, for example? Does that happen, or is there that sort of interaction with the client departments?
So thank you for the question. Yes, that interaction happens with the client departments. That interaction happens primarily at the beginning of the process. The decision to invoke a national security exemption is taken early on in the procurement process, because if a national security exemption is triggered, what that means is that we set aside all or part of that procurement from our obligation under trade agreements. So that needs to be determined early on. So to the extent that when our client departments raise requisitions with us in terms of what they need from a good or a service perspective, our procurement officers have conversations with them in terms of what potentially the best way forward would be, recognizing that in most instances, our client departments obviously know their operating environment much better than we would.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. We now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. There's a business in Montreal that also tried to apply for the same process but was unsuccessful. And this is what I'm going to read is translation, says Ms. Vignola. It would be possible to access the hard drive and to download data when the devices are serviced. Now, is that correct? Well, I'll go with CSC, please, for an answer to that question.
I will do my best to answer it. Normally, we have to take all the surrounding details of a particular deployment into account when we explain something like this. But typically speaking, in the more recent versions of equipment like this, they are starting to emerge now with embedded hard drives and USB ports that can be used for maintenance purposes, for uploading and downloading data and software updates and that sort of thing. So in the truest sense of the word, those would indeed give vectors for something like that to be done with malicious intent.
OK, donc il est possible.
So it is possible, in fact, for the hard drive to be accessed in embassies during servicing. Is that what I've understood? I've understood correctly?
So I believe our colleague from Global Affairs said that their practice is to have any maintenance workers escorted by embassy staff, in which case that would be observable behavior. But I'll leave it to him to weigh in on that.
That's exactly correct. Yes, we would see if that was happening as to whether or not that it would pose a risk. We are obviously going to look at that moving forward, and our new approach will correct and minimize that risk.
Ms. Vignoli, you have a very quick question and answer. You've got 20 seconds.
Donc, rapidement,
So quickly, how possible would it be, I mean, aside from having an escort for whoever is providing service, to manage that kind of risk that could be done not on site?
I can't speculate as to how possible that would be, but we don't want that to happen. So our procedures moving forward will prevent that from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Doniger. Now we'll go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a very pointed question, and please forgive me if this comes off terse. In 2018, there was an Auditor General report on the physical security of Canadian emissions abroad. The AG report concluded that overall, Global Affairs Canada had not taken all measures needed to keep pace with the evolving security threats at its missions abroad. The department had identified security deficiencies that needed immediate attention at many of its missions. Many of these deficiencies were significant and several had been identified years ago, yet not all of the recommended measures to address these security deficiencies were in place. These measures included improved video, surveillance, alarms, and the installation of vehicle barriers at entrances. The report found that most of the department's capital projects to upgrade security were at least 3 years behind schedule, usually because of the weakness in the department's project management and oversight. The physical security measures at each mission did not always match the levels of its threat. For example, one mission in a high threat environment had no X-ray machine for visitor screening. So 2 years ago, the AG reported that Global Affairs was already at least 3 years behind schedule. So now we're at the 5-year mark and counting, and we still don't have a contract to purchase this necessary equipment. This lack of adequate or appropriate security equipment means the safety of Canadian diplomats abroad and the local country staff is still at risk. How can you justify these delays? And what do you have to say to the diplomats and their families who still don't have the equipment they need?
Thank you for the question.
Excuse me, just for a second, Mr. Danaher. If we could, maybe if we could get you to unplug your mic and maybe just lean forward and talk into your computer a little bit closer, and we'll see if that works a little bit better. There still is some issues with the interpretation, so we'll check that. If that doesn't work, we'll have you go back to what way you've been doing it.
Fortunately, it defaults to this thing when I take that off. Is this any better?
Can you unplug it?
I will do so right now, but I will just have to go in and.
Mr. Chair, that's fine. The current.
It is a lot better.
Yeah.
Is this better?
I think
for me, it
but
is greatly.
the interpreters decide.
Yeah. If they.
Okay, we'll try it and see. Thank you very much. And Mr. Green, I did stop the clock for you, so we'll give you time to answer. Thank you.
So we do take very seriously the security of our personnel around the world, and obviously it's a major challenge keeping 178 missions around the world with the latest equipment. I can assure you that where we need X-ray equipment right now, the missions have it. The one mission that auditors found where there wasn't an X-ray machine working that day, it was unplugged and being serviced, and manual bag search was in place, keeping our people safe. Every time equipment is being serviced or it fails, we have a manual process in place to keep our people safe. It is absolutely my top priority, and we took very seriously the Auditor General's recommendations, and we've made enormous strides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danaher. Appreciate that. Mr. Paul Hughes, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, listen, from the beginning of this meeting, we've been watching a baseball game, it looks like. Everybody's pinging the ball back and forth. Now, we have confirmation here that the Chinese Communist Party owns Nuctec. Now, the assessment of the material that was conducted, I don't know how it was done, but I can tell you that the ISO 27001 standard and other standards as well. So it's very vulnerable in terms of security. Now, thirdly, before moving on to the contract that could have been provided, that was about to be provided, Border Services received 5 pieces of equipment, and we were told that it's okay for the embassies. There was no connection. We can look at the NUCTEC equipment bought this year for Border Services. We're looking at the image, cabling, video equipment. I served for 22 years in the Canadian Forces, and I've served on this committee, and I've never seen such a security breach situation. We're not in the political realm here. We're really in the details. We're dealing with a company that is a national security issue. And we have confirmation that China, Russia, and others are a danger to our national security. Could we get a very clear answer? Can we confirm that the Government of Canada will stop immediately dealing with NUCTEC?
Monsieur.
From Public Services, perhaps?
Merci beaucoup pour la question, monsieur.
Thank you very much for the question. If your question is, will we stop dealing with this company in particular? I'd like to tell you that it would be yes, but right now, based on the standards, the rules, the approaches we're using, the legislation, I can't guarantee that. Well, we'll look into it, but based on all the information we have, it's pretty clear. If any of our current laws are being breached, or if there are shortcomings to the legislation, well, I invite my Liberal colleagues to help fix that, because there are problems. Right now, I'm not playing political games. I really think the security issue is an important one, and you all have your work to do. But at some point, it gets so complicated that the right hand isn't talking to the left hand, and it looks like we're in this kind of situation because the global affairs assessment went to Public Services, then the security issue wasn't flagged. It's not working. So let's note that at the committee here. Now, on that, actually, I could give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, or the others.
I think I'm taking it, Mr. Paul Hoos. Ms. Mullen, it sounds like some of these security issues are going ahead without CSE's knowledge. How do we change that so that CSE has input into this? Because obviously valuable input. But should we ever be allowing, you've identified Russia and China, for example, as state-sponsored threats to Canada, and the report that came out today, should we ever be allowing their techs, their state-owned tech, to be in any of Government of Canada operations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It's a difficult question to answer rapidly, but I'll do my best.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. CSE is not a regulatory agency, so we do not endorse or ban specific technologies or specific companies. However, I think more importantly, the first part of your question gets to the heart of the matter, and that's how do we ensure that departments and agencies know when to come to CSE to have us do our assessment, one part of which in this case is looking at the ownership and the business practices of the entity in question. And I think that's exactly what I was getting at earlier when I said, because technology is evolving, things we didn't used to look at, we now should start looking at, because capabilities, like I mentioned before, with embedded operating systems and USB ports that didn't used to exist in X-ray machines now do. And so I think that's really the biggest step that those of us here as witnesses today are working on together, is to add into the procurement process flags that come up when equipment that falls into these particular categories is being acquired, so that the departments making the acquisitions know to reach out to CSE.
Thank you. Mr. Johari, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank to the witnesses. I actually like to continue on the same thought process. A lot of my colleagues have covered various aspects of the process and the way it was granted, the lack of the review or the limited, scope of the review that was done. But I was really intrigued by the response that the PSPC provided when was asked, will you work with New Tech again? And the answer was, well, I really know in the future, but given what the rules and legislations are today, we have to. If my understanding is correct, because I'm quoting you, what I would like to ask is what changes to the rules and regulation do we need to put in place? Because I think Madam Mullen already talked about some of the elements of the process that could be enhanced regardless, independent of the rules and legislation. I found that very interesting. So going back to PSPC, can you talk about where do we have to strengthen the rules? Where do we have to strengthen legislation to make sure that we don't run into a situation like this again?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As quick background, the question that I was responding to was whether I could guarantee that we will never do business with NUCTEC moving forward. And so in my brief response to that, I indicated that, I can't provide that guarantee that will never occur. As I indicated before, when we undertake a procurement process, we don't know in advance who's going to be the winning bidder or the winning company. So there's always the potential that a company, state owner or otherwise, may be successful in undertaking the procurement. So as was indicated by Ms. Mullen, there is work being done to be able to identify commodities that may be at higher risk of vulnerabilities kind of moving forward, where we would need to ensure that we've got the appropriate security approaches or mechanisms to decrease the potential risk. If the question is do we want to limit or exclude a specific company or exclude, for example, a country or geographic region. I don't know what that would mean in terms of having to make changes to the current procurement process. I can't point to a specific rule, but chances are that would be something that would be fairly broad in terms of an approach.
Thank you. You mentioned that based on the requirement that during the RFP, there were 63 technical requirements, and then whoever passed those technical requirements, then the second element came into, which was the lowest price. So if my notes are correct, it's that there were 7 responses to the RFP, and off of those, there were 3 that qualified, that met those 63, and then New Tech was the lowest price. Are you in a position to be able to share the gap between the price that New Tech provided and the price that the other 2 provided?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I actually don't have that information with me. So if it's possible, we could provide that to the committee.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Are any of the other 2 that they were shortlisted, the Canadian companies? I really like to think that we have some Canadian companies that they build conveyor style X-ray and walk-through X-ray machines. Any of the other 2 were Canadian companies by any chance?
So I don't know of the other 2 that met all 63. What I can say is of the 7 companies that submitted bids, obviously one of them was NUCTEC, which is from China. The remaining 6 companies were either from the UK, Canada, or the US.
Okay, but you don't know whether the shortlisted one were Canadians?
Not offhand.
Not offhand. Okay. A little bit of a technical, just for my clarification. When you put a standing offer, what is the typical dollar value that's attached to that standing offer?
So technically, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So technically, a standing offer has a dollar value of 0. In our systems, we actually need to put in a dollar amount. So our procurement officers will tend to put $1. In standing offer in requests for standing offers, there are times when we will give an estimated value of what we anticipate could be the potential call-up value of all the call-ups that would be issued.
So the $6.8 million is your estimated the value of the contract, or was it actually what the New Tech bid came at?
No, that was the standing offer has no dollar value associated with it. So the total cost would depend on what call-ups are issued and how much, in this case, equipment would have been procured or could have been procured. So the 6.8, I assume, would have been either an estimate in terms of what a potential value would have been, because as I indicated, there's no obligation on the part of the government of Canada with regards to these.
Yeah, I believe
thank
I'm
you,
out of
Mr.
time.
Rachi, and thank you, Mr. Johari. We've come to the end of our first hour, and we are now going to enter our second hour. And we will start with 6 minutes with Mr. Macaulay.
Thanks very much, Mr. Rachi. So New Tech got was awarded, the standing offer. Was it there was two different items. Did they receive the standing offer for both the X-ray machine and the other item, or just the one?
Thank you for the question. Just the one.
Did anyone else receive the standing offer, so to speak, award for that specific item that NUCTEC received for? Or is it only for NUCTEC?
For the standing offer with regards to conveyor belt X-rays?
Yes.
There was only one standing offer that was awarded.
So to NUCTEC. So what would have happened if Global Affairs came out and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and buy? Would it automatically go to the existing standing offer, or would it go to another competitive bid?
So in a scenario where a standing offer is in place and the department wants to issue a call-up against that standing offer, they would issue the call-up to the company who's identified.
So it would have gone to
NUCTEC.
NUCTEC. So the process that we, PSPC ran, it would have led Global Affairs to buying from NUCTEC and no one else.
For X-ray conveyor belt.
For this,
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
so a bit of the pushback seems, it was only a standing offer, it's no big deal. They, in fact, basically won the right. The only company won the right to sell that to us. There wasn't a contract, but it should be the narratives. They did not get the contract yet, because unless the media brings this up and this doesn't explode, they would have received the contract. Am I correct?
If call-ups would have been issued against the standing offer, yes, they would have.
Yes, no one else.
Those call-ups would have been contracts.
There's a comment was in the media. I'm going to read it. For Global Affairs to proceed when China has been implicated in a systemic campaign of cyber espionage against Canada, while former diplomats are being held hostage and tortured in China or Chinese prison, is unintelligible. Global Affairs, do you agree with that? I'm sitting here and I'm dumbfounded that this could have possibly happened. And I accept Ms. Mullen's point that, okay, technology has been changing, but a 5-year-old would know, I'm not going to bring a piece of Chinese technology that's owned by the Chinese Communist Party into Canadian property where they could have a Wi-Fi signal sending out to be collecting the information. Their workers could come in and put a USB drive in. Do you agree with that assessment that it's unintelligible that this could have happened? And what do we need to change to ensure this never happens again, that we're not sitting here saying, well, technology has changed, or, well, we didn't think of putting an NSE on it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for sounding so critical, but good Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I can't, obviously, in my position, doesn't make me an authority to answer all aspects of Canada-China relations. I can speak to this acquisition and the fact that it's very, very important for us to have reliable, trusted companies providing us this type of equipment. We are a learning organization. We'll learn from whoever brings items like this to our attention. And in this instance, we conducted, I would say, a responsible review, and we've taken the correct action moving forward.
You say a responsible review. how could we all know? We saw what Huawei did to Nortel. We see the costs taxpayers are bearing to clean out the old Nortel building of bugs placed by that state before D&D comes in. This is not a secret that the Chinese state is an adversary to us. How is it possible we could have made a decision that overlooked the fact that a Chinese communist state owned company was putting in technology into our embassies? Like, I'm sorry, like, it's not a learning experience. We all know this. How is it possible? And what other examples are there that possibly is happening that we're not aware of, that are compromising Canadian security or our embassy security or our financial or commercial secrets?
Thank you again for the question. I think the question gets to the heart of the Deloitte report, which is not anti-NUCTEC or anti-China. It is pro-security. And it forced us to re-examine our paradigm. And you may not like that the answer, but that is the way forward for us, is to make these decisions based on a more rigorous security assessment than we've done for this type of equipment in the past.
Yeah. Should we automatically use an NSC for security equipment then for global affairs?
We do.
So
we
don't run
did,
into this?
We did request, and we have an NSC for all of the equipment in our security and high security zones in our missions around the world. So this is equipment that, as I said, was in the public access zone and was assessed probably in a more naive era of looking at this type of equipment. As my colleague at the CSE points out, the technology changes very rapidly, and we are now aware of risks that we weren't aware of previously.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley, and thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Hanner. We'll now go to Mr. Kuzmirchuk for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I really do appreciate the discussion we've been having today, because it's a fascinating conversation in essence about how do we balance, how do we manage risk, and how do we balance that with balancing the billions, tens of billions of dollars in trade that takes place between our two countries. So this is really an interesting discussion. I bet many of us wish that our own BlackBerry was in the business of making X-ray machines. We know that that's a Canadian company that is well trusted. If only they made those machines. I do have a question about the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, which issued a determination on October 26th. Following a complaint that they received from a potential supplier. So I guess this is a question for PSPC. I wanted just to get a sense of what was the basis of the tribunal's involvement in this procurement process, and was it security or was it something else?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Obviously, I'm not an expert in the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, so I'll share the information that's publicly available. A complaint was filed with the Canadian International Trade Tribunal with regards to the request for standing offers. Both elements of it, both Group 1, which was for the X-ray machines, as well as Group 2, which was for walk-through metal detectors. In essence, and the Canadian International Trade Tribunal is the vehicle or the remedy or the place where companies can go if they have concerns with regards to the way that the procurement was undertaken. So a complaint was filed with the Canadian International Trade Tribunal. It was accepted for review. The tribunal undertook their review and issued their rulings. In essence, basically found that the evaluations that were undertaken by Public Services Procurement Canada were reasonable, and basically that they found, I guess the way that I would put it is they found kind of in favor of the Crown. So the complaint that was raised was not upheld, if that's the appropriate term.
Okay, and I understand you had mentioned that you're not an expert in the work of the CITT, but I was just wondering, what is PSPC's role in the complaint review process? Does PSPC come forward as a witness in any way, share documents? I'm just curious what that relationship is between the CITT and and PSPC.
So when a complaint is filed with the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, the complainant basically provides their rationale for the concern that they're raising with regard to the procurement that was undertaken. If PSPC is the procuring organization, then as part of the CITT's process, we're given the opportunity to provide, I believe it's called an institutional response, which is basically kind of our explanation of what happened in terms of the procurement process, and to be able to provide the tribunal with information on the procurement. And so that information that we provide as a department, as well as the information that's provided by the complainant, I would assume is reviewed by the tribunal, and then they issue determinations.
Okay, terrific. And in the report that we received, the briefing, it indicated that that the CITT has not yet publicly made its reasons for its determination public. Do you have a sense of when that will come forward?
So my understanding is that occurred within the last day or two.
Oh, okay.
So the rationale or the explanation for the CITT's determinations are usually made available on their website, and my understanding is that that's happened within the last day or two, but I don't have the specific date.
Okay, that's terrific. And just a question. The fact that PSPC was awarded costs as a result of this determination, does that happen frequently? Is that a regular occurrence, or is this a unique happenstance?
That's a good question. I can't speak to the regularity of it. And again, representatives from the tribunal might be able to explain this better, but my understanding is that in instances where the tribunal finds in favor of either the company that's finding the complaint or of the federal contracting department that is responding, part of their mechanism or part of their process is to award costs. And I believe the cost, they have a specific cost structure. Just to put in perspective, I think it's, if memory serves me correctly, I think it's $575 or something like that. And I think that has to do with the Canadian International Trade Tribunal regulations that mandate or that kind of oversee the way that the tribunal operates.
Okay, and I'm sure that the cost is there to make sure that there's no excessive or egregious cases that are brought before. So I'm sure it serves a little bit as a deterrent for vexatious complaints to be brought forward. I guess another question I just simply have is, what are we doing? This is a question for PSPC. What are we doing to support Canadian businesses to take advantage of the procurement process?
So thank you very much for the question. I was the Director General with the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises, and so we're doing Public Service Procurement Canada is doing a number of things, but in the interest of time, I'll only highlight kind of two of them. One is the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises exists to be able to help Canadian companies understand the federal procurement process, be able to find opportunities that exist on the buy and sell website, and to be able to get assistance in terms of understanding the federal procurement process. So we have regional offices. Public Service Procurement Canada has regional offices across Canada where Canadian companies can avail themselves of the services of the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises in order to be able to help them participate in federal procurement. So in the interest of time, that's the one that I will highlight specifically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irachi. And now we will go to Monsieur Blanchette Joncas for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to greet you, dear colleagues and witnesses. Thank you for being here with us. I think it's a very important issue that we're looking at here, that is the security equipment by NUCTEC. Now, my first question is for the Canada Border Services Agency. Will it be reevaluating its current contracts with NUCTEC, given the concerns raised for screening equipment? Does CBSA have concerns regarding the NUCTEC equipment provided?
Thank you very much for the question. And let me say that we have done a review of the equipment that we have in operation from NUCTEC and looked at the contracts that have been fulfilled under in this space. And we have leaned into our colleagues at CSE and elsewhere to gather their expertise and make sure that we have done that. I will say that we have satisfied ourselves that to date, we have had no security breaches or incidents of concerns with this equipment. And we are looking forward to strengthening the contracting regime around this. So for example, we are working with our partners in Public Safety and Procurement Canada and public safety more broadly to enhance the contracting security guidelines to ensure that transportation technology, and more specifically, X-ray detection equipment in the port of entry space is considered within that policy. And we will be looking to move forward with a national security exemption for our operations in this space. And equally, we are looking to accelerate our life cycling on this to ensure that we can move forward with ensuring that any new equipment that we have or any equipment we have in operation meets those new security guidelines. In the meantime, I will add that we have obviously, again, reviewed our mitigation strategies, which I mentioned earlier. As you can never fully eliminate risk, and so it's important for us to ensure that we have the right operational procedures, the right departmental security procedures in place, and the right tools in place for our staff so that we can mitigate any residual risks that may be there.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Harris, pour les informations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, for this information. Now, I'll go with slightly longer questions. Data is very important. Please don't hesitate if you have any information that I could add. Now, still for CBSA, in November 2019, the CBSA provided a contract, award of contract for tens of thousands of dollars to NUCTEC, and it went through a PSPC. And it was for the Emerson facility in Manitoba for the non-obtrusive screening of large items. For example, it was an X-ray, a high-intensity X-ray machine, and the date on it was March 31st, 2020, and there was also a guarantee of extra licenses and others. Now, this was the best overall offer. There were no security requirements imposed. Did NUCTEC provide this equipment to the CBSA before March 31st, 2020? And is this equipment being used in Emerson in Manitoba?
Thank you for the question. It was not provided to us prior to March 2020, but we have received that equipment. It is not in Emerson. It is elsewhere. It is not currently in use. It is what is referred to as a mobile large-scale imaging device, and so it is meant to scan pallets, large pallets, so commercial pallets, and is mobile, so it can be deployed as needed. But as I said, on a go-forward basis, we're looking at our life cycling of this in light of the new security requirements that we are moving forward with.
Merci des précisions, Monsieur Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Now, does CBSA think that it will acquire more by the end of March 2025?
Acquire more X-ray detection equipment? Sorry, can I just clarify? Are you more broadly, or are you specifically again referring to NUCTEC equipment?
Tout simple. Je vous dirais.
Whatever the device is, do you have any extra systems from NUCTEC that you'll be acquiring for CBSA by March 31st, 2025?
It's my understanding that our current contracts are fulfilled, and so any new equipment that we acquire on a go-forward basis will be done under the new guidelines for contract security.
Merci des précisions, Monsieur.
Thank you for these details, Mr. Harris. Could you explain why the security requirements, why there were no security requirements related to this contract?
At the time, under the contract security policy, as I mentioned earlier, the review process that is done is to determine what type of information this equipment handles, whether it's secure, personal, or protected classified information, and whether it's connected to a government network in any way so as to introduce risk in that space. X-ray detection equipment in the port of entry environment does not do any of those things. It is a supplementary tool that is used by staff. It is not connected to our networks, and it does not hold classified or secure information, and therefore did not trigger under the procurement policy the need for the enhanced security requirements that we are now talking about.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
We'll now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I have found this committee to be intriguing. Of course, it's a little bit of a departure from some of our previous conversations. And yet it seems like one of the themes we've had throughout OGGO has been PSPC's reliance on Deloitte. Can you please just refresh my memory exactly what Deloitte's role was in their report? I guess.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's probably more a question for Global Affairs Canada. It was my choice to go to Deloitte for this review. My view, and I think you would understand this, is that I wanted this review done outside of my department by people who weren't involved in the original decision to assess the technical requirements, the security requirements. And I have to say, I have really good people. I have engineers who are really seized with security. They applied the paradigm of the policies that were in place, and in the public service, often policies have the weight of gold. And what Deloitte did was give us, I think, a recommendation that would help us break that paradigm. And so that was their role.
Is this a case of an emperor? Is this a case of an emperor wears no clothes? Like, I feel like we ought to have the mechanisms within our public service to be able to provide without prejudice, and sometimes maybe even counter to policy, although I know it's not your job to make policy recommendations. It just strikes me that we have Deloitte now reporting back, and I'm wondering where the gap is between our public service and their ability, and maybe even within other departments. We hear through you, Mr. Chair, Liberals love to use the language of whole of government approach. Well, where was procurement on this? And why do we not have checks and balances in place within procurement to ensure that these gaps or these needs are met?
If I could, Mr. Chair, and I'll respond on behalf of Global Affairs on this one. Global Affairs does have a procurement team, so we have some insight into procurement here, although this was done by PSPC on our behalf. Employees often don't feel empowered to challenge policy. And I'm saying this as a public servant of almost 40 years, right?
Yep.
And especially at the levels where these decisions and these reviews are made. And they do yeoman's work. They're bright people, hardworking people, and they apply what they apply at the time. And they follow the paradigm that is dictated often by policy. And they did a great job of applying the policy. What we were able to do with the Deloitte report and our subsequent conversations with the CSE and others is to say there's a different way to look at this equipment. We're going to be buying this for 10 to 15 years. We need to future-proof this against future threats, which we cannot anticipate right now. We need to look at this differently, not at the present with the policies that exist, but looking forward. And Deloitte
it strikes me that. Like respectfully, and I appreciate the support for staff. I believe you. I believe that to be true, and I appreciate your candor. What strikes me is we don't have within the national security framework, whole of government approach across all departments, a substantive whistleblower framework through which people who believe our national security could potentially be at risk, contrary to the lack sometimes of collective wisdom that we have as legislators to be able to contact, our security establishment or the RCMP or the CBSA or some kind of way to draw a red flag to say, contrary to public policy, this needs greater scrutiny when it comes to national security. We're not talking about staplers. We're not talking about printers or papers. We're talking about our national security diplomats all around the world. So I'll leave with these last two questions, and I think they're important ones because we want to move forward and we want to make sure that we do the right thing out of this committee. When will the Deloitte report be made public, and what are the next steps for procurement of this equipment?
So we're moving right now as final draft. We're moving to make it final by the end of the week or early next week, and we can share it with the committee at that time. We're happy to do so. And what we're doing moving forward, we're already in conversations with Public Services and Procurement about a replacement standing offer for our X-ray equipment and our metal detection equipment that we have, our walkthrough equipment we have around the world. So that process is starting, and we're starting by changing the technical specifications so that they won't be published widely going forward. Those are two really, really important steps that we're taking.
And just to be clear, it was PSPC who did the procurement on your behalf. Is that what I heard in one of your earlier answers?
Correct, and they're very important partners for us.
And so if somebody from PSPC would want to maybe perhaps answer the question about why we needed to bring Deloitte in to report back on this versus having a check and balance in place internal to our government.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The Deloitte review, my understanding is they took a look at the security posture of global affairs missions and the equipment that they would need within it, and not specifically on the procurement process.
Did anybody within your department raise the red flag to you as a senior manager, say maybe this isn't right here?
With regards to the potential, pardon me?
With regards to potential national security threat, did any of your very learned procurement folks say we should probably look at this closer?
When we received the request from Global Affairs and it had no security implications, nobody flagged it to raised it up. I know that there was conversations between Global Affairs and our procurement folks, but at the time the view was that security, that there was no need for security.
Not an email, not a passing.
Thank you, Mr. Rachi, and
maybe
thank
we
you,
should look
Mr.
at
Green.
this.
So we need to.
I think I got 2 more minutes coming up later on in the night, so we'll go back to that.
You can follow through with that. We're now finished first round. We're going to our second round, and we will go with 5 minutes with Mr. Paul Hughes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You are here with us today. You are representing various departments rather. Right now we're looking at public safety, public services, and global affairs. Now, in terms of ministers, when this problem was brought up, which ministers were informed? When was Minister Champagne, let's say, informed of the problem?
Hello?
If I could, Mr. Chair, I can't assume, I don't know exactly when my minister was informed, but it would be on or around the days just after the award of the standing offer. And yeah, I think he was publicly questioned about it at the time and made pretty quick statements that he was instructing the department to conduct a review.
Now,
in terms of public services and public works, Mr. Yerachi, was your minister informed at the same time of the problem? Thank you very much for this question, Mr. Chair. I can't say exactly when she was made aware, but I would imagine it would be once information was provided and that Minister Champagne talked about it. She would have been made aware at that time.
Yeah.
All right. So when ministers were made aware, did they ask you to take action? Did you have direct orders from them to fix the situation?
Travaux publics.
Public Works.
Chair, I can speak on behalf of Global Affairs. Yes, very, very quickly, I was instructed to conduct the review as I've discussed earlier.
Okay.
Okay. Now, For Ms. Mullen, in terms of CSE, Securities, your court, do you have any contacts? Or I have it here, CSE? Yes, I was using the English and the French. Were any notices provided with regards to NUCTEC?
Thanks for the question, sir. Again, we were not actually approached by Global Affairs in support of this NUCTEC standing offer that we're speaking about today. So my minister...
Oh. Did CSIS contact you? Said Mr. Paulus.
Does.
Sorry, I'm having trouble following the question, I guess. My apologies.
Okay, vous représentez.
Okay, you represent CSE. Did CSIS contact you? Did CSIS contact you regarding any national security issues? CSIS?
Not with regards to this file.
Okay. Juste pour l'information du comité.
Just for the committee's information, I can mention that 2 years ago, the government tabled C-59, and I saw it go through at the National Security and Safety Committee, and it was trying to clean up. It was attempting to clean up what was happening, and I see that it didn't work. And what it flagged was that departments were working in silo. That's what we're seeing here today. There's not enough communication between departments. So for the good of the committee, for the information of the committee, I think we need to review, a quick review of what's happening with the enforcement of C-59. I'll give the last minute over to Mr. McCauley, my colleague.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you, Mr.
again.
McCauley. You have a minute.
Ms. Mullen, if you could just take a bit of time, like going forward, what do we need to do to protect our assets, our people, our data, everything, both overseas and embassies, but also within Canada to protect from such state-sponsored aggression, I guess, and dealing with state-owned enterprises.
Thank you for the question. It's a big one.
Yeah.
What I will say is that the technical aspects that CSC is normally seized with assessing are but one of the inputs into a question like that. As you're aware, there are geopolitical and economic and other considerations that need to be layered upon the technical advice and guidance that we offer in terms of supporting departments and agencies in making acquisition decisions and frankly, making decisions on who they partner with going forward in the international realm.
Thank you,
so
Mr.
I think it's
Sorry, thank you, Mr. McCauley. We'll now
That was
go
a quick minute, Chair.
To Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to provide some background information here. So there was a process opened for a standing offer, and NUCTEC was the one who was deemed to be eligible and to have the best offer. That's right, the standing offer for the X-ray equipment. And that was after going, perhaps the processes need to be reviewed, revised. We can debate what should have happened. But after checking off every item on the list, this was a fairly typical process, was it not? Yes. All the offers we received were assessed against the call. There were 63 criteria, as I mentioned, technical criteria. 63, that's right. All were reviewed. 3 companies were identified as meeting these 63 technical criteria. And based on that, we then looked at the prices called for by those 3 companies, and based on that, the standing offer was awarded. Now, based on my own experience, nearly 4 years working with officials from your department, public works. I mean, you do a good job. Whether it's for your own department or your partner departments. Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, we definitely take these processes very seriously, and the assessments are conducted in partnership with our clients. Of course, the technical criteria are set out by our clients. So the technical assessment is done by our clients. We conduct a secondary review to ensure that the way the offers were assessed meet the requirements, and then we reassess everything at the end. So despite all of this, despite this process being followed to the letter, despite the 63 criteria, when this came out, a minister, I mean, Mr. Polis asked the question, minister was made aware and asked directed his department to conduct a review of the contract because the process didn't seem to pass a certain test, for example, because there's an embassy, security, equipment, so everything was reviewed. Is it normal? Can it be part of the process? And does it bother you at all or make your life more difficult in any way? Thank you very much for your question. In the interest of time, to be brief, since we have a standing offer, since it is a standing offer, there was no obligation on the part of the federal government. The fact that there was a review conducted by our client to determine whether the provider would be able to meet their requirements they're reviewing. As my colleague from Global Affairs stated, once the report is completed, they will be working with us to see how to move forward. Last question, very quick one. Mr. Yarachi, I know what domain you work in. I know it's in the department's policy to encourage Canadian businesses and SMEs, especially, for this kind of contract. Can you very quickly tell us about these various efforts to ensure that Canadian companies are represented? Thank you very much for this question. As I mentioned, the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises is there to help Canadian businesses learn about the opportunities that exist. We are also conducting other types of work. For example, the digital approach for our procurement systems. We're moving towards a digital system for that, and we are trying to simplify the procurement process as much as possible to encourage SMEs to participate. Thank you very much for all your work.
We go 2.5 minutes, Ms. Vignola.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My question is for CSE, Communications Security Establishment. Earlier, I talked about the various communications and other options, looking at the ports and the entryways that could provide a lot of information. It could be a business like Nuctec or the same kind of business company with the same aims. So what are the risks that they could access data? What would be the risks for Canada if this kind of company had access to the information, to the embassy's data and our telecommunications data?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I think the answer to your question really depends upon the sensitivity of the information that's going to be flowing through that machine. And so it will depend largely on where it's deployed, which is why typically when we do our assessments, we have to do it in the context of an actual deployment, as opposed to a very general contract like this one, where it's not actually in the context of a deployment, but rather potential for future acquisitions. So I think that's really where the crux of the matter is where it's deployed, what the surrounding circumstances are, and specifically what type of information is going to traverse that product. That's going to determine the degree to which the risk
Si c'est dans une ambassade.
Thank you. So if it's in an embassy, for example.
So clearly what they're putting these pieces of equipment in place for at embassies, and obviously Global Affairs is better to answer for, is to screen people that are entering the embassy to make sure they're not bringing in anything that they shouldn't be. And so really the type of information that this machine itself would carry isn't going to be the problem. Where the problem lies is whether there's any additional capabilities embedded within the machinery that is of concern. And that is where a supply chain integrity assessment, such as we do, comes into play.
Est-ce que, je vous remercie pour votre...
Thank you for your answer. Should the government have its own procurement policy, or rather, should it review its own procurement policy to ensure that Chinese tech companies no longer have access to Canadian infrastructure? Because I can see here that Nuke Tech had a $4 million contract for communications, image and video equipment with a Canada Border Services Agency. Should we review the whole policy to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen? Because this contract dates back to November 2019.
If we could get a very quick answer to that, please.
Is that question directed at me, or is it directed at PSPC? My apologies.
Oui. Yes. To you.
In my opinion, the work we're doing right now to identify additional types of equipment that should be flagged within the procurement policy for review of this type, I believe that will get us to where we need to be more aware of what sorts of things should come to CSE for evaluation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mullen. Thank you, Mr. Green. You have 2 minutes. No, you have the 2.5 minutes.
I just want to go back to that original question to see through you to PSPC, just to really be crystal clear that at no step along the way through this process did somebody flag that this could potentially be an issue.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So during the procurement process, when we received the initial request from Global Affairs, we did go back and double check with them to see whether or not the no security clearance was a potential issue or concern. And my understanding is that we also checked prior to the award of the standing offer, just to double check that there was still no security issues at the time. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, and I appreciate that, because we're trying to get to a place here where hopefully people can have the ability to express any kind of dissenting opinions against policy that might protect people. I have a question. It's a bit of a shot in the dark, and it's through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Mullen. In 2014, there was a presentation called IP Profiling Analytics and Mission Impacts, which tracked cell phones of travelers passing through Toronto Pearson Airport. Was there any learnings from that we might be able to apply to the potential risks that could have come through malicious technologies that could have been placed in our own equipment, in our own missions?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So although I'm not specifically familiar with that particular study, I can say that the Cyber Center does issue quite a lot of advice and guidance in terms of specific mitigation measures that individuals who are traveling should take to protect themselves in terms of the types of vulnerabilities that their communications equipment, their cell phones, et cetera, inherently have. which is informed by that report and others like it. So I would say that there is quite a bit of advice and guidance available for travelers for exactly that reason.
Not so much travelers. I'm just suggesting that if you were able to do that to travelers, I can only imagine that NUCTEC, if it was malicious in its equipment, could have potentially done that within our missions as a form of a national security threat. And I'm wondering, through a reverse engineering thought process, is there any learnings from the work that you're doing in communication security establishment to better check the profiles of our future procurements to ensure no malicious technologies is hidden and stowed away within equipment that we're procuring?
So yes and no. Yes, we are using the things we know about the techniques that we employ within our lines of business to better design protections to those types of techniques. But we are not, in that we are not being asked to weigh in on specific changes to procurement activities, other than, like I said, urging departments who are making technical procurements to come to us for advice and guidance.
Hopefully that's a takeaway from today's meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Mullen. We're going to our last grouping, and we'll go to 4 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Mullen, thanks for your comments. You mentioned about urging departments to come to you. Should this committee, and just in your opinion, should this committee then ask PSPC to change and TBS to change the policy that such all tech purchases have to go through this purchase or a process such as that?
Thank you for your question. All tech purchases, I wouldn't even begin to know how my team could keep up with that level of demand. Okay. So I do think it's about choosing the right types of equipment in the right deployment scenarios that warrant our attention.
For security reasons, should we then, have an outright ban on buying tech equipment from that's controlled by state-owned operators that are in an adversarial position to our country?
So while I can see how you might feel that way, CSC, of course, is not a regulatory agency at all.
No, but I'm just thinking for security reasons.
So I think we definitely need to continue to consider who they are, the sensitivity of information, and the specific technology in question before we decide whether
and they
or not
at least should have a security clearance, which apparently NUCTEC didn't. Mr. Hatch, I just want to go back to, because there's some of my colleagues here seem to be pushing the idea that the system worked, we caught the problem, we had the review, we've stopped purchasing from NUCTEC. But is it not the reality by them receiving the sole standing offer for this equipment, if the media hadn't found this, we'd be looking at them installing it in our embassies right now? The system only worked because the media found it, basically.
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I don't really know how to answer the question, to be perfectly honest.
They were the only company approved by the approved.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No contract signed, but they're only company approved. So if Global Affairs had gone forward, they wouldn't have started a whole new process. They would have gone to the standing offer that had been approved and would have gone forward with NUCTEC unless we had found out about this issue.
With the standing offer in place, had Global Affairs issued a call-up, it would have been issued to NUCTEC.
Right. So it's not a matter of the system worked and we caught it. It was a matter of, thank heaven, someone in the media found it. So I want to thank them for that. How much did we pay Deloitte for this contract? And was there any scope outside of whether we should go forward with the NUCTEC or not, or is it a broader scope? Mr. Danaher.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the value of the contract was slightly over $250,000, and their scope.
What was the scope?
The scope was pretty broad, and it was giving us verbal advice on some security aspects, but it was also looking at how we approach and how we review all security equipment purchases moving forward. It was not about this standing offer in particular.
We've not gone to the CSC and saved ourselves $250,000.
I
think Ms. Mullen would be happy to do it.
She would for this one piece of equipment, absolutely. I, as the assistant deputy
for all the
minister,
security equipment.
So, as the assistant deputy minister,
qualified to offer that information than the CSC?
It was a policy matter. It was not about the technical use of equipment in a particular deployment. And CSE is absolutely invaluable for us in that aspect, and they have been in the past in other aspects of our deployments. On this one in particular, and on other security equipment, I needed an assessment of what happened, why it worked that way, and I now have it. And
Perfect.
the
look forward to
team.
seeing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're out of time. Thanks, sir.
We will now go to Mr. Weiler for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But just given that we are much past time today, I have another commitment. I know a number of other members have commitments that they need to get to at this point. I would yield the rest of my time today. And I just also would like to suggest that going forward that we do our best to stick to our approved timings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiler, for doing that, and it's much appreciated. And so with that, I would like to thank the witnesses for staying with us. And with the vote, things got extended a little bit longer than we liked, and that's unfortunate, and I appreciate just trying to stay as close to on time as we can. With that said, we do appreciate that any of those officials that have indicated that they will provide information to the committee. If you would please do so in sending that to our clerk so that our clerk can disperse that amongst the committee, it'd greatly appreciate it. And I'd first like to thank our interpreters for sticking with us in some of the AV issues that we might have had, and the handling of that, much appreciated. So thank you. With that, I call this meeting adjourned.
Just Mr. Chair, can I just make a request that for future meetings that witnesses are required to log in early and just do the sound check early? Because I feel like 6 months in, we should have a better system in place where we make sure this isn't a problem on a move forward.
Mr. Green, in this case, we actually did, and Mr. Donaher actually did log in earlier, and they tried to do a lot of checking with that to make certain it was working. They had some, and we just, because of the situation, we wanted to make certain we got through. The other option would have been for Mr. Donaher to come back at a later time and come to committee on that issue. But we found that the interpreters were able to accommodate us in this situation, and we appreciate that from them as well as us bearing with us. So, but we will make certain that everyone comes in earlier. So thank you. With that, call the meeting adjourned.